Welcome to Try This at Home. I'm Cliff Bumgardner.
And I'm Harrison Stewart.
And Harrison, for the very first time, we're not alone.
He's right behind me, isn't he?
I mean, in the universal sense, we're not alone in the world anymore. We are super excited to have our very first guest here on the show. And I could not be more excited that it is actually an old friend of mine. And I'll talk to him about this in a second, because as I was thinking about this, I realized today how long we've actually known each other. And that kind of blew my mind. But our first ever guest on the show is an award-winning comedian and magician, can be seen all over the United States and on shows like Penn and Teller Fool Us, which I was telling Harrison before the show is one of my favorite performances ever on that show. And I'm not saying that because he's a friend of mine. It was genuinely awesome, and folks should look it up. But he's also the host of the podcast, The Internet Says It's True. Welcome to Try This at Home, Michael Kent. Man, thanks for being here.
I didn't know I was the inaugural guest.
You are.
We tricked
Man,
you.
I feel so honored. And also, that means I very well could be the last guest.
Well,
Yeah.
that's up to you.
If the show goes downhill from here, we know where to point the finger.
I apologize if you guys get bad reviews after this one. Man,
It'll
that's a lot of
definitely
pressure
be
to put on someone.
The professional performer comedian.
Yeah,
that
not
sings.
us. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, the show is definitely resting on him and not us. That is the case.
Cliff, how old were you when we first met?
I was trying to piece that together today. I would have had to have no more than 15, 16.
So your audience probably doesn't know that you were like a hardcore magic guy when you were younger.
I was.
Yeah,
And
like way into magic, and that's how you knew who I was and actually came to shows. You there's a video still on YouTube, I think, that you shot on that's on my YouTube.
Yeah.
That you brought the cameras out for, and it's me doing the rope trick that I don't do anymore.
Maybe that
how
one
long
was
ago
on
it
me.
was.
So there we go. It's a trick.
Do you know how long ago you have to go back to find a trick that I don't do anymore? My show has been the same for so long. I shouldn't advertise that.
Oh, man.
The trick is to just get a new audience every time. That's the way to do
There
it.
you go. Maybe
That's what we're banking on.
Yeah, that's what we need. Just get them in every week who do something new.
Yeah.
As long as we have known each other, I was actually thinking about it today. I don't know much about your history with what we're talking about, Mythbusters. So before we hop into the episode, were you a fan of the show back in the day? Did you watch it when it was on? What's your thoughts on Mythbusters on the whole?
Watched it. I probably watched it like midway through. The episode we were talking about today is early. So,
Yeah.
you guys are on the early episodes, and I don't think I was that early of an adopter of Mythbusters because, other than I didn't know anyone other than Adam and Jamie on the show. And I came in more, like you're like Grant and like that. That's probably the where I started watching and when the show was a bit more refined than the episode that we'll talk about today. But I would say I'm a fan. I've always had my critiques of the show. I have trouble watching it when it's on television because there are just way, way too many commercials.
Yeah.
Which is a testament to the show. It means it's a popular show that people are watching. They're selling ads. But oh my God, there's too many cliffhangers on the show.
Yeah.
Like right when they're about to get to the thing. And that's why watching it streaming is a much more pleasurable experience,
I definitely agree with that. There's like 4 ad breaks. So It's like a 22-minute shit. No,
there's a
it's
long
like a
one
40.
in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually because we're nearing the end of the first season, and that's very recent on the show. The original kind of format would go one myth at a time myth at a time for the most part. It's really the last like 2 episodes where you can see, I guess it was getting popular, and you just see ads popping up everywhere in these constant, like there was literally on our last episode, there's where they come back and they're like, nothing's happened, be right back. And then they go to a break. They're just like doing that all over the place now, which it does really change the pace of the show. And I hadn't thought about how much worse that would be when an actual ad is there.
And I think it also like, if it was just one myth, maybe that would be more bearable. But the fact that they're also jumping around between 3 different stories at the same time, it makes it really tough to like, okay, what are you talking about now? Which myth is this? And the 3, obviously, I don't know if it's always this way, but like not related at all.
Yeah.
I know they've done themed shows before, but these 3 were very, very different theme.
It is
things.
all over the map. I'll actually set this episode up for us. So we're talking about season 1, episode 15. Our myths are Sinking Titanic, Goldfish Memory, and Trombone Explosion. The episode originally aired February 22nd, 2004, and is directed, as always, by Peter Rees. We always dive into our overall thoughts here, and I think it's only right to give our guests the floor. So, Michael, what did you think about this episode on the
Did you say Peter Rees directed this?
Yeah.
Never heard of him. I just kind of.
I was going to be amazed if you did.
I did too.
I don't know who that is. I'm not. I'm sorry, Peter. I assume Peter's listening to this. I have never heard of him.
He's
So
our
if I were
only
Peter,
fan.
I'd be listening to every podcast that had to do with my show.
Same.
I hated this episode. Okay, so I wasn't expecting to hate the episode,
Yeah.
and I hated it for like different reasons. Okay, so the Titanic thing, I was genuinely interested in.
Same.
I hated their examination of it because of bad science. The Goldfish thing, I wasn't interested in at all, but also didn't like the science. Like their experiment was just very bad. And then the trombone thing was fun and it was cool. And those are the stories of Mythbusters that I always like, where it's like, okay, it didn't work. Let's see how much stuff we can blow up to make it work. You know?
Yeah.
But it was based on a myth that literally no one has ever heard of.
Yes.
Right.
It's based on a story that someone heard that's not a popular thing, right? They took this idea, okay, well, we heard a story about some orchestra somewhere, didn't tell us where, didn't tell us what orchestra. There was a story that a guy put some sort of explosions in his, or some sort of explosives in his mute for his trombone, and it did A, B, and C. It blew out, it hit the conductor, it blew the slide off, and it exploded the bell. Cool. That would be awesome if this was a story that everyone knew.
Yeah.
But it really felt like reaching for a third story on this one.
Yeah.
Like, that's my problem with that. But it was such a small part of the episode that I feel like it was okay because it was added for like the explosion value, right? Like
Right.
It was fun. They got an explosion expert, and that part was enjoyable to watch, even if you don't care about the myth or the story at all.
Yeah.
Totally. That's actually something we've talked about too, that's sort of hard when you're going back, and I think watching a show like this from 2004 is that like a lot of the stories are things that I assume maybe were going around in email chains back then, but now are kind of Mythbusters is the only place. There was one we did this season called the Biscuit Bazooka, where it's like biscuits are left on a shelf in somebody's car, they explode, hit someone in the head, and they think they've been shot, and they're holding their brains to their head. Is the
Interesting.
story. I remember that being on like my uncle's email chain back then.
Wow.
So I think a lot of these stories at the time might have been somewhat like people would have had some level of familiarity with them. They're just kind of lost in the internet.
It's a good theory. Yeah, that could be true. I mean, this is 20 years old that we're looking at right now, right?
Yeah.
So it was
21.
2004,
Oh, no, you're right. It's
2003,
exactly 20.
something like that. So like it very well could have been, something that people were talking about. Or, one thing that you face right now with TikTok is that you see something that you assume is viral, and it's not really viral. It's just viral to your algorithm.
Right.
And that's kind of this is the first time I think this has really happened in terms of social media, where it's like the user base is so big that you can have millions and millions of people see a thing, and yet it's not like ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I'll want to reference something in my magic show, and I'll have to ask friends like, hey, have you heard of this? Because I can see that there are, 20 million people watch this video and everyone is talking about it, but it's not really everyone. And I'm wondering if maybe this was an issue of that. Like maybe in Southern California, people were all talking about this thing and it just didn't hit Columbus, Ohio, where I am. I don't know.
So when the exploding trombone trick comes to your show, everybody will know now where it came from.
Yeah.
The origin.
It's interesting though. Like I spent a lot of time in bands.
Yeah.
You would have thought that I would have heard of this. I was in the Ohio State Marching Band, like one of the most famous bands in the world.
Yeah.
And no one ever talked about an exploding trombone. We played the 1812 Overture multiple times. Can I tell a story real quick about this? The dumbest thing. I've seen all kinds of different ways to replicate the cannon fire at the end of the 1812 overture. And the best are playing recordings of cannon fire. That's the only way it ever sounds good. Because if you have a real cannon, no one's listening to the orchestra. Everyone's watching the cannon guy and waiting for it to fire. And then they're holding their fingers over their ears and they don't hear anything. But so the best one is if you just have a recording and someone who knows when to hit the button. But the worst was what we did in our marching band indoor concert, which is like at the end of our season, we would do this indoor concert. And they had a 55-gallon steel drum and one of our bass drummers with a starter pistol.
Oh, no.
And his job was to fire the starter pistol inside the barrel with the hopes that the reverberation would sound like a cannon. It didn't.
What?
It sounded like a 22 caliber starter pistol being fired inside of a steel drum. It was like, bang. It was horrible. It was the thinnest, crappiest, cheapest sound you could imagine.
Oh my God.
And this is a thing that we did in rehearsal and somehow decided, yeah, that's good. We'll do that still.
Oh, we nailed it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And we
sound
played it on the
quality.
field with actual like fireworks and stuff too, which was cool, but they still not that difficult to time. There are actual timed times for those cannon fires. Yeah. So back to the show for a moment. The idea that a trombone player would have known when to light that fuse in order to, or however, it was done in order for it to sound right with the thing. It first of all, very implausible. Mm-hmm. It's something that I can see would just be like a story that got spread around, but not actually happened. So,
I do love imagining the overture with it
was like
that is so good.
Yeah, it was just not good.
It's funny you say that because years ago I saw Adam and Jamie when they were doing their live show right towards the end of Mythbusters, and somebody asked them during the Q&A portion, what's one thing if you could blow it up? What would you most want to blow up? And Adam Savage's response was 18. Too soon. It was the 1812 overture, but with water heaters going off. Because
that is a bizarre thing to say, but I guess.
And to wish for.
There's a moment in the show where they get a lot of water heater myths, and they actually figure out over the course of the show how to detonate them on command, basically, because they have to for the purpose of their test. And so he said that sound would have been his thing.
That's amazing. Now, I can't speak to the sound, but that's a thing you hear about, right? Like you hear about stories of people's water heaters just shooting like rockets up through their home, and exploding the home or doing whatever. I can't say I've ever seen that, but that would be pretty amazing to see. But I feel like you'd have to have like an Edward Scissorhands type neighborhood with the houses all in a row, and then like they have to go off sequentially down the street. That would be the way that would be good. A water heater out of a house loses all context. It's not funny anymore. It has to go through the roof.
Oh yeah, there has to be
an
debris.
Angry housewife baking a pie, turning her head. That's what makes that good.
Myth 1, sinking Titanic, also called in the episode Down with the Titanic. So the question here, will a sinking ship suck you down with it? The idea is essentially that could a sinking ship cause a suction that actually drags you down with the boat? And specifically, of course, they use the Titanic as the main example.
Didn't have to.
And they have
completely arbitrarily selected, I feel like.
And they have a lot of footage of ships sinking that I thought was terrifying. Like some of those angles, especially in the pre-GoPro days. Yeah. To see that footage of the water racing into the boats, it was a heck of a visual.
Especially that one at the angle. Yeah. It looks like a Christopher Nolan movie. Totally. I was like, what's happening?
Totally. Yeah. And
super scary.
Yeah. One of the reasons we specifically wanted to have Michael on for this episode is I know you have done for your show, The Internet Says It's True, a little bit of Titanic research as well. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell folks, one, where to find your show, but also what's your history with the stories and mythology around the famous Titanic?
Well, there's a lot more mythology around the Titanic than I covered on my show. My show is specifically about things that sound like I made them up but are really true, like provably true. So the internet says it's true is sort of a play on that thing where, people say, well, if the internet says it's true, but everything on the show is actually like verifiably true. So there are the myths about the Titanic not really being the Titanic. I'm sure you've heard those, that it was the sister ship. I think it was the Olympia or something.
Yep.
And that it was sunk for insurance reasons and all these different things. Not true, but even if it was true, not provable. So anyway, the Titanic historians get really angry about that one for good reason. The one that I did cover was about the guy who was like second in command. This guy's name was Charles Lightoller. And the reason I found his story so amazing is that he really should have died with the Titanic because he was going down with the ship.
Yeah.
And was a victim of this suck that they're talking about in Mythbusters. Like, he was basically being pulled against a grate that was I believe a gate to a hallway that he was against and couldn't escape. As the ship was going down, he was getting sucked into the ship. And the only reason he didn't die is because a boiler exploded and propelled him away from the ship. And then he found himself basically floating in the ocean, was rescued. The reason his story is so amazing is not just because he lived through that, but he lived through several shipwrecks and went on to be one of the guys that was driving the Citizens boat armada during the evacuation of Dunkirk during World War II.
Wow.
So he just happened to be a boat captain in England, and he rescued a bunch of British soldiers from the shores of Dunkirk during that part of the war. Crazy story, just happened to be the same guy. Really amazing fellow. The episode on I've done the episode, and I think I've replayed it a couple times on my podcast. I think it's called A Titanic Hero, or a Titanic-sized hero, Charles Lightoller. The podcast, The Internet Says It's True, available wherever you're listening to this show, but also on the like NPR network and stuff. You can hear it there, YouTube, all the different places. But anyway, so it was one of those things where when you guys talked about this episode, I was like, well, that's clearly true.
Yeah.
That, like I didn't think, and I still believe after watching the episode, I don't want to do any spoilers before you talk about it, but I still believe it's true.
Yes.
I still think, and I think that where I was talking about bad science with this one, they did 3 experiments, really 2 experiments. Adam starts with one in the very beginning of the episode in a cylinder that's maybe 6 inches wide, where he has a weight and then a tiny little smaller weight. And he doesn't see any movement from the smaller weight. The smaller weight is way too heavy compared to the big weight, in my opinion. Okay. Now, when they did the second one, which was in a swimming pool, and they're dropping 200 to 300 pounds, and they have something that's almost neutrally buoyant, that thing, they saw the suction effect going down, right? They saw, and I think the science, they present in the episode, 3 theories of why it happens.
Right.
And I don't remember the science exactly. Do you remember what the different theories were?
Yeah, so the 3 main theories that they present are, 1, that air bubbles coming up during it make the water less dense. So you would essentially, the term they use is fall through it quicker. 2 is that the cavities in the ship create pockets that the water can rush through that would actually drag you through through the ship. And 3rd is that the ship going down creates the vortex effect. That's kind of the main idea, is that the ship actually rushing down, they compare it to drafting behind a truck on the highway, that there's like this air effect.
That's the one that makes the most sense to me.
Yeah,
is that there's sort of a negative space above where the ship sank, and so there's this vortex that sucks you in toward where that is. But in terms of the Charles Lightoller thing I was talking about on the Titanic, it's probably the second one in that case, because you've got this giant ship with empty air, and there's probably is like a ton of water rushing into those cavities. And the way that they described him being like stuck to a grate, it makes sense that the water would have been sort of pushing him in that direction of where the water's flowing. Who knows? There's no way to prove any of this, but
I listened to. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to say the problem, in my opinion, is in their third experiment. I thought it was horrible.
Yeah. The main reason that I say that this is completely arbitrarily selected is because, like, I listened to your episode where you play, like, footage or audio of the guy talking about it, about the suck. And I was like, wait a minute, that was available to them? And they didn't, like, I expected to hear about this person and his experience on the Titanic and then trying to prove, but it just became this generalized thing about, like, if a large thing sinks underwater, will it drag you down with it? And I was like,
Right.
But if we know that this happened according to this man's firsthand account, test that.
And you think about all the shipwrecks, though, Harrison, like, this was just, I mean, it is the most famous shipwreck, I guess, of all time, the most famous sinking of a ship. But, like, also they had that mariner on there saying, well, I was always told if a ship starts to sink, to swim away. Right. So it is general belief, like general knowledge that people think, like, if the ship sinks, you've got to get away. And the same thing with, like, you know, if you ever are in a sinking car, they tell you to, like, make sure you crack your window so there's not that pressure differential between the inside and the outside of the door, so because you can't open the door. You know, it's that type of thing where it's like, the reason these people probably know about it is because of warnings that they heard when they first went through those safety spiels. Yeah. So, you know, it is a thing that's, like, I think somewhat common knowledge.
That's fair.
Yeah, it is. It does. They didn't really reference the Titanic too much for it being titled
Named.
The Titanic.
Yeah, they tee that up at the beginning, and then that's kind of it. And I mean, obviously, they would not have been able to get an actual ship the size of the Titanic to test, but they end up doing a much smaller test, as you said, and it does kind of, it's like the myth sort of changes as they're doing it, which is something that we've seen on the show. We've seen them kind of have to adapt here and there. I did love, we've gotten this season, there's a lot of great montages of them having to buy ridiculous things. Beginning with the very first episode, they have to get a rocket, and so they just call the Air Force and say, can we please have a rocket? And of course the answer is no.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe the Air Force was not on board with that.
Who would think? I did love that they are going around looking for a boat just to sink it.
Yeah.
Like they're just walking around going like, we got to find a boat. And also that they're at the point in the show where they got the budget to do that.
Yeah.
They're like, we need to sink a boat.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if it's the first season, it's 15 episodes in or whatever, you know, and whether it's the first season or the second season, I don't know how they determine that.
That has been murder on us all season long. There is no. I've gone back even to the original DVDs from season 1 and found something different.
Inconsistent.
Like it's all.
That's interesting.
It's everywhere. I don't know.
I can imagine when you're creating a show like this, they're committed to the bit. Like they can't. They can't. You know, bail out at this point. They have to do this, and so they have to make it work. My problem isn't with the way they did it. Like that's great TV. We're going to buy a boat, put some holes in it, and then purposely sink it. Not only sink it, but then they screwed the first time up, so they had to go, what'd they say, like 50 feet underwater, salvage the thing, bring it back up, drain it, and do the whole thing again. But my problem was that it was the same problem I had scientifically with the very first that Adam did, and that a human weighs, I actually Googled this today because I was curious, what did a human weigh in 1909 when the Titanic sank?
Good question.
And for men, average weight was 140 pounds. Women was like 120 something. Okay, so let's say you're a man, 140 pounds. The Titanic is how many thousands of tons? Long tons. It's like 500 and some thousand long tons or whatever.
Yeah.
The differential between the size and the weight of the ship and the person needs to be bigger if you're going to do this experiment. And I think that's why the middle experiment they did, which was in the pool, worked the best, because the float that they used to determine if it's getting sunk down was like very light in terms of buoyancy. Like it was all very neutral buoyancy. So like they should have done something with like, you know, like a G.I. Joe guy with that sinking ship.
Yeah.
And see if the G.I. Joe guy gets sucked down a little bit. That's probably a little bit more on par with the Human and the Titanic. and that might have been a little bit more. So when they said myth busted, I yelled at my computer and said, the hell it is. It was not, there was no busting of that myth, but they had to go somewhere with it.
Yeah.
They have to make it's not like they can do their failed experiment and be like, well, it could have been busted. Maybe it wasn't. We don't know. They can't say that, right? That's like not, maybe they do. I haven't watched enough consecutively to know if they ever leave it open.
At this point in the show, no. The show, I think, to my memory, because we're doing this in order, so we haven't looked ahead, but to my memory, they actually get there, where it becomes busted, plausible, or confirmed, where it's actually like they have a middle ground to go, we can't prove it is, we can't prove it isn't, so we're going to say that it's plausible, but there's no way that we can actually know this one way or another. At this point in the show, it's much more binary, busted or literally if it's not busted, they just end the segment. They didn't have that like structure built into the show yet.
I have a question for you guys. When you rewatched this episode, was there a moment that you were about to get very mad because you thought that they were going to give up at the end? So the ship sank.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Adam
Jamie
wasn't near it. He jumped ship too far away. And the thing sank and he was like, I don't know, 15 feet away from where it was sinking.
Yeah.
And then they were like, well, now we have to decide what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And for a moment I was like, are they not going to raise the ship and do it again? Because if that's the case, I'm out. This is BS. I legitimately got angry expecting them to say that at the end. And then because I was also looking at the timeline, I'm like, well, there's only 30 seconds left of this episode.
Yeah.
What are they going to do?
And then Jamie even says, first of all, this was his idea. In the very beginning of the episode, he was like, no, we need a boat. And I'm actually a water master. I scoob all the time. It's going to be fine. I can reconnect the cables. Not a problem. And then he comes back up and he's like, all I'm saying is it's a lot of work for no payoff. I was like, okay.
Yeah. One dive in, he's like, I'm out.
I hear you.
Yeah.
But this is your plan, my man.
Sure. And it is pretty dangerous. I mean, like,
Super
he really
dangerous.
did ride the ship down that second time. Like, he was standing on it while it was underwater.
That really surprised me when they started talking about the fact that Adam was going to be on the boat for that part of the test. I mean, they have at this point in the show their crash test dummy, Buster. I was like, that's why you have that, is so you don't have to maybe kill a guy.
He's
like,
in the episode.
Yeah. I was really surprised.
Did it bring a lot more to the episode by making it Adam instead of
I think
Buster?
it did.
Well, they had to do it again. So, padded the runtime.
Buster wouldn't have bailed out and been 15 feet away.
Exactly.
One and done.
100% committed.
Easy.
Yeah.
This also,
Single shot guy, Buster.
Yeah, he's a one-take Jake.
That's right.
to your point about the second test in particular, this also got me thinking about something that we've seen on the show before, is the difference in a story like this between someone saying, I felt like I was being sucked down by the sinking ship, and actual science of a vortex or suction or whatever. If you're on board a ship and the water hits you and pins you to a wall and you're going down with it, later you're going to say, I got sucked down with the ship.
Yeah.
Which is what Adam says
Exactly.
at the last experiment in the pool. He
Exactly.
said, I could feel like I was not buoyant. I was going down with the weight.
Yeah.
And so there is that weird territory of maybe there is not, and I agree that their final test doesn't prove it one way or another, but even if they got to a result that's like, no, there's not actually, it's not creating a vortex that if you're 10 feet away from the boat is going to drag you in, even if they were able to get there, I would still go, yeah, but if you were on a boat and that happened, you would say I got sucked in.
Yeah.
We've had that with explosions on the show before. The difference between what's actually an explosion or something actually blowing up, and if something happened to you in your life and there was a flash of fire, you'd go, holy crap, that exploded. Mm-hmm. I feel like the show gets in that kind of murky territory when you're talking about myths. You're talking about stories that are being told verbally and that people are adding their own experiences to as they tell. I thought this set there a lot between the science aspect and the scientific questions, and then the actual just, if this was your experience, you'd say the same thing and you'd end up you're not going to convince me otherwise that I wasn't sucked down by a ship if that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think something I'm forgetting in my critique of this whole thing is that this is a TV show and not a science lab.
I do this every episode.
Yeah. Like, okay, having a real live person and a boat as big as we're able to get for this television show probably has to happen to make this good television.
Right.
If you make a show called Mythbusters that is scientifically sound, it's probably going to be unwatchably boring.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like there probably has to be a little bit of junk science just to make it fit in the format of the show, in the time of the show, and to have some personality to the whole thing, to add some humanity to it. Because like if they're just scientists, they could have done the whole experiment in that first little 6-inch water thing. You use that weight and you use, I don't know, a piece of grass.
Right.
And then it's done.
Yeah.
Myth's not busted, and then it's a 10-minute show.
Yeah.
So
and then you're canceled immediately.
it's a TikTok. Maybe that's the follow-up to this podcast, is that you do scientifically accurate versions of every episode on TikToks. And she's like, well, they didn't need to do that because I just did this.
A heavy steel tugboat catches their eye, but it quickly becomes obvious that this old hulk is way beyond their needs.
I think this boat is so perfect for our Titanic rig, it would make me cry if we were able to get it.
Myth 2, Goldfish Memory. So this is a story I feel like most people have heard, that goldfish have such bad memories that it's fine to keep them in a small bowl because by the time they make it around the bowl, it's a whole new place to them. Their memory is like 3 seconds long. I think most people have probably heard that at some point. I loved that they immediately go to their folklorist who says, this is really about us just making ourselves feel better, right? Like we're all
I
just,
loved it.
we're all
Doesn't
just up on that.
sugarcoat it. Just
No, the most
straight
honest
up.
thing in the whole episode. She was great.
There was a myth some time ago where it was like, it involved, I think it was like Portuguese immigrants or whatever. And they cut to her at the beginning and she's like, this is just straight up racist. Like, you really don't need to test it. It's just, they wanted a racial stereotype. And I was like, myth confirmed.
Yeah.
We're done. We're out.
Pretty cut and dry. I don't know why you're asking me. Actually, you just want me to say the thing that the audience knows. You know this already. Is that good? You don't need another? All right, cool. I'm going home.
We do get with this myth the beginning of something that in my memory becomes a huge part of the show, which is the Adam and Jamie competition.
Yeah.
That it's not just we're going to do a test or we're going to go to an expert and do a test. It's Adam is going to do a version, Jamie's going to do a version. And what I do love about that is it really starts to establish their characters. Where Jamie is the like structured, I have a plan, I'm going to follow it to a T, I'm going to be very, kind of military about my approach to all this. And Adam is
Adam's like, I'm going to kill all the fish.
yeah, exactly. I hope you didn't like these fish because they're not going to live to the end of this episode.
He was
didn't name
very
these fish, right?
nonchalant. Yeah, when one of them died, he was like, dang. And then that was like the end of it. It was like, all right, I understand it's a goldfish, but like, you kind of killed it.
Yeah, who cares if they're like, stuck in a bowl swimming around if they're dead?
Yeah,
Yeah.
It doesn't even matter. Look, they're not going to remember their friend who
That's
died.
right.
So it doesn't matter.
Oh, that was the like really meta version of the test. It's like, let's see if the goldfish hold a funeral. And if they don't remember.
And is it better that they don't? Welcome to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Goldfish.
They say that you die twice. You die when you die, and then you die when the last person who remembers you forgets you or something. Or
Gets
when they
flushed
die or
down the
something.
toilet.
Yeah.
Quick successive deaths.
That's great.
I do love Jamie's description of Adam, which is the most accurate and like polite diss he could have come up with, which was he's not a consistent person. I was like, that hurt. Like, that's a burn.
I watched this episode even before they got to the goldfish thing, seeing the tension between these two guys.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this is early Mythbusters.
Yes.
How many more seasons did they do together where they just had to deal with each other not really being... It's a Penn and Teller thing. Like,
Yeah.
Penn and Teller, the magicians, are very famously not friends. They're not enemies. They like each other. They're just not friends. They're work associates. And when I first heard that, it was kind of like a bummer, but then you get it. You spend how many decades working with someone. You don't necessarily have to be their friend. You have to be able to go to work and not hate the person. You don't have to hang out after work. You know what I mean? And you can tell that these two guys are so different than each other. And honestly, I find Jamie unbearable. But that's just me. I would never want to hang out with Jamie. Adam seems like a great time.
Yeah.
Even at the end of this episode, he ends it by saying, "Let's get a drink."
Yeah.
And it was just so likable. It was kind of like, none of this stuff matters. We're done sinking ships. Let's go have a drink,
Adam is definitely, I've referred to both him and the narrator, who we love, Robert Lee, for his snarky comments that he puts in. They're kind of the Han Solo of Mythbusters in that they're the characters who are mocking it the whole time so that you know not to take it too seriously. Okay. Like if it was just a Jamie through the whole thing, you'd be like, that would be the TikTok, like super serious science show. That having Adam in there to just be the clown character is so great. And we've seen that grow to the point that you made, Michael, about the tension. That's actually kind of new.
They just figured it out.
Just 2 episodes ago, they left in a fight, and you can feel that the producers went, we've got it. There's the tension. There's the conflict in the show. So the last couple episodes, there's been way more than there ever was before.
So you think they play it up a little bit here?
100%.
I don't know if Adam and Jamie are playing it up or if the show is playing it up.
The editor's playing it up?
I think Adam is definitely playing it up, because this episode was one of the first ones where I've really noticed that the show seems to frame him as a fool. And it's like, okay, he's not a robot man. Right. But he's no chump. Yeah. I mean,
he's insanely competent.
He's a smart dude.
And Adam has an excitement about science that is very infectious. That I've seen even in his like TikToks and stuff, where it's like you watch him and he's excited about it, so you feel like you should be excited about it.
Yeah.
Whereas Jamie it's like, I have to do this because it's my job and we're interested in, for the good of science, not necessarily like eyes wide, oh my God, every once in a while you get those moments with him, but it's mostly by the books.
Yeah. It is interesting how Jamie, over the course of the show, and we've seen it a little bit already, but I feel like this episode just goes hard into creating a mythology about Jamie, where they just start talking about, well, yeah, he used to own a pet shop. And then Adam goes on this riff where he's like, and he was in the special forces, and he just like says these multiple things that are a joke. And then later they're like, yeah, but he actually is a dive master and owned a dive company in the Caribbean. You're like, I don't know where the truth is anymore.
Yeah,
exactly.
When I didn't know that all that was a joke when he's listing all those things.
I didn't
either. Whenever so they said he used to own a pet shop, and then when Adam's fish dies, he calls a pet shop owner, but not Jamie.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm going to call someone who I trust.
I can't consult the competition. Yeah.
And all the shots of Adam like peeking around the corner at what Jamie's doing and like trying to take notes was so weird. Like they really took the competition part seriously of like, nope, no contacts. You boys stay in your corners. We got to have this honest fish fight. Like, it was a really interesting setup.
This myth needed all that because I found the myth in and of itself and the disproving of the myth like incredibly boring.
Yeah.
I just wasn't interested in whether or not fish have good memories. The best part of the whole thing was what you mentioned earlier about the folklorist and saying that, we say this thing about their memories just because it makes us feel better about treating them like dirt. I was looking for like maybe a competition with an elephant.
Yeah.
Because the myth with the elephant is that they have great memories, and that would have been a really fun thing to do. I don't know how you do that, but at least a mention of it would have been cool.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that the show, to my memory, does a lot more of this as it goes on, where you have a question that is maybe not inherently that interesting, or even like there's not that much of a question to it. Like you hear that, and do goldfish have memory? Well, you could go to a scientist and answer that in about 30 seconds, right?
And like, they did, and
they
do.
And they do at the end of the episode. But the part of going back to, but they're making a TV show is, can we make something can we make a narrative out of this that people would remember?
Yeah.
That illustrate that shows not tells, right? We had a myth recently where it was about, can you swallow a octopus egg and then actually it would grow in your stomach, right? Okay. That one they did no experiments and they just go around and talk to scientists like a documentary, and it's
come on, Adam, take one for the team.
Right? It's accurate, and it's like very reflective of the truth of the story and the question that they're asking, but it's like 6 really dull minutes of TV.
Yeah.
You know, so I feel like they were trying to figure out, how do we take this and make it visual? How do we take this and make it a
because they
thing?
could do this with all their myths, right? Like they could just trust experts. And listen, I'm not one of these people. One of the things that I hate about our current timeline is that people don't believe experts. But when I watched this, I didn't believe the psychologist that they brought on when he said that classical conditioning is the same as memory.
Yeah.
Fish. It seems super weird because I'm like, no, this is a Pavlovian response.
Yeah.
For these fish. This is 100% classical conditioning. That doesn't mean that they remember anything. It's their subconscious that's remembering it. Maybe that's technically memory.
Yeah.
Is what he's saying. I just, when he said that, I was like, no, I don't agree with what you just said. I'm no expert and you are. So, you know, like I said, I hate when people discredit, this guy's worked in this field his whole life. So obviously he knows what he's talking about, but also he's being paid to be on a television show. So maybe they just said, hey, just say this to, you know, help our segment go better.
Go on right there.
I did think that. I thought that was because my first response to that was kind of going back to the story versus the science, right? Of maybe the way that we talk about memory versus the way that somebody like this thinks about it are two different things, and maybe that is true. Like you said, maybe subconscious thought and memory are not that dissimilar, but they didn't really go into, they didn't have an experiment designed to create a difference or to illustrate any sort of difference. It did feel, we should say, just for the purposes of the episode, that they create basically obstacle courses, and that is their methodology for trying to train the fish to get to their food through an obstacle course and time how long it takes them to see if they are essentially remembering the course. But I did feel like that felt very much like, no, that's a food response. It doesn't square with memory as I think of memory. That doesn't square with the idea of, do they know where they are in their bowl or that they're in the same bowl, which was the whole question at the beginning that they kind of raised. So I liked the testing. I liked the dynamic and the game and the way that I remember this episode a lot from when I was a kid for some reason. And I think it's maybe I'm the fish. Well, it worked on me, but like, I do like that part of the testing, but I agree that the ultimate answer was strange.
It was definitely visually pretty. You know, the idea of these different color holes, like portals that the fish are swimming through, is very much, you know, like it was pretty and very memorable, very good TV. But I just was watching it saying, well, that doesn't really show anything about memory. And I'm sure the people that do like the rat mazes or the mice mazes have studied this, I'm sure. Right. And that's probably like is considered memory at a certain point. Like if they're responding to something based on food and based on, you know, there's part of their brain that's remembering that this thing is associated with this other thing. And maybe that's fair to call that memory, but not the way that we think about, you know, when we're talking about the basic myth, which is it's okay for a fish to swim around the same bowl because they forget.
Right.
I don't think that has really anything to do with the test that they did.
Yeah.
But there's no way to test that either.
Yeah.
There's no way to test, you know, like, are you happy where you are, little buddy?
Yeah.
You know?
He's giving a thumbs up. We're cool. It's fine.
They put a little couch in the bowl and the psychologist comes and sits next to it and they have a conversation. That's the whole episode.
They should have brought in a fish psychic.
Ooh. I would bet
ultra scientific.
Dr. Joseph Witham probably knows somebody. The folklorist could have gotten him a guy. I would bet.
I'll put you in touch, but he's not going to like it.
Talking, Harrison, about the contrast that you mentioned between Adam and Jamie and how they're really building Adam up to be silly. There was a clip that I pulled because I loved it so much of Jamie goes in and he's working on his tank, and the fish are responding, and they're going through the obstacles, and things seem to be going well. And they just cut to Adam, and all he says is,
Mine are eating their own poo.
I love the self-awareness of
Was
Adam.
that
Just,
when he was sitting back in the chair with his legs up on the desk?
yeah, just dejected and just like, well.
Well, one of them's dead. I've definitely lost. But you know what? Poo jokes. Every time.
They also, when he does kill the fish and the water's super cloudy, at one point the narrator's like, it could have been the plastic he put in the tank, but we'll just move on. And I was like, that seems like it might have been an important thing to establish if you put
probably
toxic.
supposed to clean that plastic.
Yeah, that might have been a good call.
What
so you
did
don't kill the
Jamie
fish.
do differently, though?
Because
Because,
also had
as
plastic.
far as I know, they walked out of that shop with identical setups,
It looked like it.
right? But for some reason, Adams needed between 4 and 8 weeks to boot up or
That's
whatever.
a really good point. Yeah. And honestly, that's also why I've never been interested in keeping fish, because
Same.
they're so fickle.
Yeah.
Like my childhood, that's what I remember about ever having fish is that like, well, the water has to be just perfect. If
Yes.
if you throw the little ping pong ball into the thing at the fair and then you bring home the goldfish in a bag and you got to have it just perfect or else that thing's going to die. They get shocked if the water's like 1 degree different, right?
Yeah.
My one fish story.
Which is wild because they gave it to me in a bag. Pretty sure that's
Yeah.
fairly easy to change
The guy
temperature.
handing it to me was blowing smoke into the bag.
A man with no
Actively.
fixed address gave me a bag with this fish in it. How could this not go well? My one fish story.
That
and
requires additional purchases from me.
we have learned over the course of this show that my redneck upbringing comes out in ways I don't expect. And this is one of those moments where I have a story about this.
Fantastic.
Do you remember when beta fish were a big thing and
Yeah.
people would give them as gifts and stuff?
Yeah,
Right.
they like eat each other or something.
They totally
Called them
will.
Siamese fighting fish, but that's probably racist.
I hadn't heard that one.
That's what we were
I
always
have.
knew them as.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
We gave one to my great grandmother, and she was in her 80s at the time, and as far as we knew at that moment, still pretty sharp. This was one of the first signs that maybe not so much. And we give it to her for Christmas on Christmas Eve. The next day, Christmas afternoon, she calls and says, "My fish died." And we're like, "What? You only had it today?" And she's like, "Yeah." And we're like, "Did anything happen?" And she was like, "Well, I think it did. You guys gave it to me, and I got home, and I felt the bowl, and the bowl was just so cold. I got out my hair dryer and heated him up."
Oh, Grandma.
She might have boiled her fish with a hair dryer, is what we
Okay.
think might have happened.
Okay, but who doesn't love a hot tub? Like, I see where she's coming from. She's not wrong, except in killing it, but like, easy
It was
mistake.
the most.
And to be honest, the fish doesn't remember any of this.
Yes,
Thank you.
It would have been a better test.
There's no fish afterlife. That's what we're testing for. Is there a fish hell? And can we get sent there, Adam?
We don't know because, those near-death experiences that fish have, they can't remember to tell us about them.
Crap. Okay, something happened for sure. Who were
I
you
was over
again?
there.
Or yeah.
And now I'm here.
Turns out Jamie has another advantage. He used to own a pet shop, and he knows his fish.
In addition to his time in the Special Forces and being the international whist champion and even being a lion owner, Jamie's probably one of only a handful of people in the world who's actually trained a goldfish to ring a bell. I don't have anything like that kind of pedigree with goldfish training regiments.
Myth 3, trombone explosion. So I will just say this is my favorite myth of the episode.
Really?
Because of its ridiculousness.
Okay.
I just
It
found
was
myself
ridiculous.
entertained to a crazy degree.
Yeah, it was entertaining.
Yeah. Michael, you hit on this earlier, but the basic story here is that a trombonist is in an orchestra playing the 1812 overture and decides, as one does, to put a firecracker in the mute of his trombone to shoot it over the audience in sync with the cannon blasts. Instead, hits the conductor, causing a comical domino effect, knocking him into the audience, peels the bell of the trombone up, shoots the slide from the trombone into the violinist. The basic question here is, could that ever happen? Which really means we just need to put some explosives in a trombone. is why this myth
This was a,
is in the
for
episode.
all we know, this never was a myth. They just
That's
wanted to blow up
exactly.
the
They
trombone.
worked backwards from wanting to blow up a trombone. I do not, because like this is the second like insane Rube Goldberg style myth that we've. There was another one about like someone got caught in a dryer. Fine. Then it spun them around and they knocked over detergent. Okay, fine. Then a dog came in and peed on that detergent, which blew up the like there.
Yeah.
Any part of this maybe, but you're stacking way too many for this to be even remotely plausible.
I want to believe that this was like in Adam's contract when they actually got the show. He's like, I just want to blow up a trombone. I don't know why. I've always wanted to do it. We need to make a myth about it.
Yeah, I'll do your show.
Yeah.
But it'll cost you.
It'll cost
Roughly
you
3 trombones.
3 ancient trombones. That's going to be the cost. I do love
Pay up.
when they go. We've had this a few times this season where the Mythbusters world encounters the normal world. And hilarity ensues, and they go to a music store and like, we're looking for a trombone. The guy's like, oh, for a student? And they just go, no, to blow it up. And his response is, maybe something used then.
Yeah. Step into my basement.
I loved that.
You were prepped?
Yeah,
Right on.
he was ready and not phased. He was like, okay, used. That's where we're going to go for you.
Boys, I've been waiting my entire career for this moment. Step into my office.
Oh, man. So the whole idea here is they're just going to try it. They get out Buster.
Thank God.
Thank God they're not shooting it at Adam this time. And one thing I did love about kind of the theatrics of the myth is that they set up a loading dock to be their stage and their theater, which goes in the category of like, they didn't have to do that.
Sure.
They didn't have to set out like 40 chairs or whatever it was and set up a music stand and all this stuff. But it really does add to the ridiculous visuals of the show. Like it makes the
I didn't
whole
think
thing...
about that, but that's a really good point. It does help you kind of see this as not just like a stand holding a trombone. It really did feel like, oh, okay, I get it. Like this is where the orchestra would sit. This is where the guy would be. And
Yeah, like
totally added to it.
they could have done this in the parking lot, right? And behind the shop or something, and it would have been the same test. But going that extra mile is one of those Mythbusters kind of things. As the show has gone on, they've tried to make it more theatrical and build into that in a way that you kind of see their skills as filmmakers, as special effects artists, that's really their whole job at the end of the day. And you see that more and more coming into this part of the episode. We also meet in this section a character who does come back on the show. I remember this guy, and this is his introduction, Jack Morocco.
Hell yeah.
The pyrotechnician. So, Michael, you wouldn't know this, but what we've been experiencing through the show is they keep getting new pyro guys.
Oh, that's
Every
funny.
week, it's just there was literally one episode where
Well, they keep blowing up.
one
Yeah, it's
pyro
like the drummer in Spinal Tap.
exactly 1 week in one episode, one myth. They bring in a pyrotechnician. He does one part of the test, and they're like, "We had to get another guy to do more explosive." And They had
Why?
to bring in,
'Cause
Why?
the
What
first guy
happened
said
to the
no?
and they never explain. We're just like, "Why? What happened to the first guy?
Yeah.
Why is
He's
this going
not
on?"
licensed anymore.
But
He's no Jack Morocco.
Jack Morocco sticks around, and he had to when the first phrase we hear him say on Mythbusters is,
Just another day of blowing something up.
Yeah.
I gotta say,
he's a
for-
Coen Brothers
point-
character.
but for a man named Jack Morocco, whose primary job is blowing stuff up, not the voice I was expecting.
No.
Not
No.
at all. He was like, well, just another day in the neighborhood.
I didn't
It's like,
expect him to
all
go.
right.
I wasn't expecting full Fargo. That's not where I thought Jack Morocco was going to end up.
There's
We're not a
one
Bang
point
Theory.
in this experiment where Jamie is just like, I've got all this extra gunpowder laying around. What if I just pour it in the trombone instead of sticking to the myth at all? What if I just pour all this in there? And they go to Jack Morocco and he just sort of shrugs and he's like, yeah, okay. He's like, in all of his expertise, he's like, couldn't hurt.
And then I love that he's like, well, I hope we're not flying too close to the sun. It's like, this is an Icarus moment for you. Like, this is the hubris. This is going to sink us. Blowing up that trombone too hard.
Well, his attitude is like, if only there was an expert around to stop us.
Yes.
It's like,
Yes.
you're the guy, man.
Yeah.
That was your job to stop
That's why
them.
he has the job.
You're the pyro guy.
He's
Yeah, the first
that
guy
won't
said
say
no.
They do this pretty much straight up, as straight as you can when it comes to making a rocket out of a trombone mute. And they rig the trombone with explosives in the mute. And in the first test, which they say has the explosive equivalent of like Chinese firecrackers, it does blow the mute out and actually hits Buster.
Yeah.
And my first thought on this, even though the bell wasn't peeled back and the slide didn't go anywhere, it definitely wasn't the destruction that the myth called for. Right. I did have that thought of like, it's another one of those places where if you're a conductor and you get hit with a mute and you're not expecting it and there was an explosion, they made a big deal out of the fact he didn't fall off the stage. I would probably fall off the stage. Like
if Buster were like reacting to being hit.
Yeah,
exactly. That wasn't really in the test, and they did make a big deal out of the fact of like, yeah, he didn't go anywhere. And it's like, well, he's not going to get blown off the stage like he got hit with a law rocket, but like you might go, oh crap, and fall off into like that's not the craziest. I mean, by far not the craziest part of this myth.
And
but I did think
an
that was
episode where they test, someone getting shot with a gun and flying back, and whether or not that's plausible. But what I thought was interesting was that each time they did this test, it wasn't the mute that went flying out of the trombone. It was just the cap of the mute.
Yeah.
And there's this one weird scene, and I rewound it to see if I missed something, and maybe I still missed it, where Jamie's got like pliers or clippers or no, Adam has got like clippers or something, and he's like, I don't know what he's doing to the edge of the mute, like all the way around the mute. Like, I don't know if he's trying to purposely weaken it or if he's trying to make it fit the trombone better. I don't know what he's doing there, but I wanted to see the full mute shoot out of the trombone, not just the front of it, because that may have knocked Buster over more. If it was the full mute, maybe they don't put it in the trombone quite as far, or they lubricate it, or they do something.
Right.
That's what I wanted to see. But each time, and they didn't even mention it, each time it's just the mute broke in half.
Yeah.
I think what that was, the one thing they did mention is that the force of the explosion was actually causing the back of the mute to bow out and stick it in the trombone.
Oh, right.
So I think they might have been trying to loosen it so that it wouldn't do that or give it extra room or something. Because I do remember them saying that seemed to be the problem, is it was just blowing out, getting stuck, and then the cap would go.
Yeah, that could be it.
This whole myth comes down to just, as we said, more and more explosive. It's basically the whole reason of doing this. And I remember in my head, I mentioned at the end of last week's episode that I remembered this myth and the visual of that trombone explosion when they pack it with way too much and it goes off. It is a hell of an explosion. Like, it is one of the biggest ones we've seen so far, and particularly given the setup of Buster on a stand and it's a trombone shooting, like the Looney Tunes-ness of this was super entertaining to me.
Sure.
But
and Buster's shirt was on fire.
Yes,
it was.
He just catches.
His tuxedo shirt just complete, which is hard as hell, actually, lighting your tuxedo shirt on fire.
Not only that, but like, he's made for car crashes.
Yeah.
And they still are finding new ways to just blow him apart, set him on fire, scorch it. He looks like Harvey Dent at this point.
Yeah.
That guy has been through it on this show, and he's not even through the first season that he was on. I don't know how long Buster is going to live.
Still
They're
didn't
like,
shoot
this
out the
is
slide.
technically a pedestrian dummy because he was standing, but then they couldn't figure out how to make him stand.
Yeah.
Which is another thing about knocking him over. Like, you put him on a pole.
Yeah,
it took Adam. Yeah, it took Adam like a pretty solid roundhouse kick to even push him over.
With that huge explosion, it didn't really, this is why they considered the myth busted. Like the slide didn't really leave. The bell didn't. The only damage to the bell was from when it hit the ground. I think I was looking for that cartoon like splintered back bell, where the metal's like peeled.
Yes,
that's what I was wanting to happen. Also, like I said, didn't care about the myth. If it had been a myth that I had actually heard of, I would have probably cared, because a lot of these things are like things that come up in regular conversation. The other myths.
Yeah,
and this one just isn't.
Like we've the few that I definitely remember are the ones that I have like affected things in my life as a result. Like when they do does driving behind a truck, does the draft actually give you better mileage? And they were like, no, it doesn't. And I was like, oh,
Walking and
Well,
running in
then.
the rain is another one.
Yes.
That comes up all the time.
I'm
Is
still
it-
never gonna walk in the rain. That's just BS.
It just feels- yeah.
I saw their evidence. I'm still. It just feels wrong.
Yeah.
What's weird about this one, they do bust it, but they actually say in the wrap up, they say that the spirit is kind of there, but overall the myth is busted. And I was like, what's the spirit?
This isn't Ghost Hunters.
The fact,
We're not looking for spirits
the fact
here.
that you can put explosives in a trombone, is that?
That's the spirit. Like I could put
Confirmed.
bottle rockets in my butt. Like it's not a. You're not really proving anything here.
But
Yeah.
can you do it? That's what we're testing, baby.
And live.
Can you blow up a trombone?
yeah. Oh,
You can blow
turns
up
out.
anything if you try hard enough. That's what it proved.
Yeah, if you have the heart, if you have Morocco around,
Yeah.
you can absolutely.
Enough heart and enough Jack Morocco, and anything is possible. Yeah, I did in the end. My kind of final verdict on this one was that I just I loved more the process than the question, the myth itself. The explosives
Absolutely.
guy, the way that they walk through it. It was like, I thought this was the most entertaining myth in the episode, even though I was with you that I was more interested in the Titanic as a story.
Yeah.
This was in that category of, I hadn't heard it, but that kind of made me go, can't like, what is this going to look like? I don't even have a frame of reference for what I'm expecting this to be. And so I think that's why one of the reasons that like I was really super entertained by this part, even if the methodology was kind of weak throughout.
Totally. It was good TV. Goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like, this doesn't need to be a scientific experiment if it's just a television show meant to entertain people, you know?
Yes.
And it really just did feel like they were really just sort of shoehorning in a way to blow up something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, I have to assume that they tighten it down a little bit on just frequently in these early episodes. Like, what are we testing for, though? Like, I genuinely don't understand. And then sometimes the question will change halfway through, like based on the new information they have or whatever.
And,
It's like,
and that's where it's really important that the story or the myth
Yes.
is nailed down. Like,
Yeah.
you have to know what the myth says.
yes.
Right.
And in this one, since it's a myth that's very squishy, you could change it and be like, well, trombonist could have killed people.
Kind of worked.
Yeah. I think the myth was how many how many pyrotechnicians can we go through in a calendar year? And they finally landed on one. So I think we're going to be good. We're at least 3 or 4 in, so we'll see how it goes. Well, that was the end of this episode. We will be back next week with season 1, episode 16. The myths there are Buried in Concrete, Daddy Longlegs,
Great.
and Jet Taxi. It sounds like a perfect Harrison
This is-
episode.
yeah. It's like all my least favorite things in one.
And it will be our final episode of season 1. So
I thought you were canceling the show for so long.
live.
You didn't
I
pass
told
this
you.
by me.
First guest, last guest.
But we will be
The
back.
reigning champ.
We will be back next week to break that episode down. But Michael, where can folks find you if they want to check out what you do, either on your podcast or otherwise?
Yeah, just go to michaelkentlive.com. All the links are there, but including, to the podcast. The podcast is called The Internet Says It's True, and there's nothing having to do with magic on that podcast. And that was done on purpose. We started it during the pandemic 4 years ago with the understanding that I need something to do that has nothing to do with magic, because magic is like what I do for a living. It's my life. I spend all the time on the road doing that. So this is that thing I do to sort of get away from that. And it's all about, like I said earlier, interesting stories that sound like I made them up. The one I'm working right now is about a bear that helped to fight with the Polish forces in World War II.
Oh my God.
Like a literal bear that they taught to carry ammo casings. So working on that story now, researching it. The most recent one I did is a digest of 4 episodes we did about interesting things that happened in the air. So that's The Internet Says It's True. My website's Michael Kent Live. I'm also on all of your social media. TikTok is Michael Kent Live. You can just Google my name. You'll find stuff. Is that arrogant to say? Just Google me.
No.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. This was a blast, and we will be back next week.
Bye-bye, babies.
Try This at Home is produced by Slugline Media. The show is written, hosted, edited, and shot onto the internet by Cliff Bumgardner and Harrison Stewart. Our music is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. You can follow the show on Instagram at TryThisPod or email us, trythisathomepod@gmail.com.